I never imagined that my life would unfold like a plot from a twisted drama. It feels as if I was born into a movie filled with dysfunction, betrayal, and a cast of characters that would make even the most outrageous screenwriter raise an eyebrow. My family has long been a chaotic whirlwind, one where even the toxicity depicted in films pales in comparison to my reality. I wouldn't wish my experiences on anyone, not even my worst enemy. Yet here I am, living through the turmoil and trying to make sense of it all. My father's infidelity shattered my perception of family and trust. When I discovered that he had been cheating, his immediate reaction was a threat to my inheritance if I told anyone. "Keep your mouth shut, or you'll lose everything," he said, his voice a mixture of desperation and anger. Instead of succumbing to his intimidation, I decided to confide in my stepmother, the woman who had stepped into my life when I was just 6 years old. I felt she deserved to know the truth, and I believed she could handle it. When I shared what I had learned, little did I know that it would lead to a bitter divorce that left my dad with half of his wealth gone and his mistress walking away from him. In the end, I realized that the consequences of his actions were unavoidable, and I had taken a stand for what I believed was right. Reflecting on my family's history, it's hard to pinpoint where it all began. My parents divorced when I was only 3, an event that shaped my entire childhood. According to my father, their marriage was a colossal mistake from the start. They were young, naive, and perhaps too caught up in the romance of it all to see the inevitable cracks forming. They had me soon after getting married, which, at first, seemed to give their relationship purpose. But as time wore on, my mother found herself overwhelmed by the responsibilities of parenthood. To her, raising a child was not the fantasy she had imagined. It was an unrelenting commitment that she wasn't prepared for. My mother was stunning. Every man would fall for her charms, and her beauty was as captivating as her spirit. But her pursuit of freedom over family led to her making choices that would haunt all of us. She began cheating on my father, not just once but repeatedly, and each time she was caught, she would apologize only to repeat the cycle. Dad often speculated that she got caught intentionally, believing she wanted him to take the initiative to leave. It was a toxic dynamic, and I could never understand how he managed to endure it for so long. But when she finally abandoned us for one of her lovers, it was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. To this day, I have no memories of her. To me, she is a mere shadow of a person from my father's past. After her departure, my dad poured himself into work, starting a business that ultimately became wildly successful. He accumulated a significant fortune, and I sometimes wonder if my biological mother is aware of his wealth. Perhaps if she knew, she might have returned, but thankfully she didn't. Shortly after her departure, Dad met my stepmother, whom I lovingly call Mom. When I was 6, she entered our lives, and she instantly became a beacon of love and stability. Their marriage when I was 8 marked the beginning of a new chapter. My stepmother was kind, patient, and understanding, taking the time to earn my trust. At first, I was apprehensive, unsure of how to integrate her into my life, but she approached our relationship with grace. Before long, I was attached to her hip, and the bond we formed was genuine and heartfelt. I remember our outings to the movies, trips to the arcade, and simply enjoying each other's company. Years passed, and when she gave birth to twins, I felt a twinge of fear. Would I still be her priority? Would I be pushed aside as she focused on her new children? I remember the moment she came home from the hospital. She called me aside, looked me in the eyes, and reassured me, "You are my first child, and nothing will change that." In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of love, and I hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. Our family of 5 thrived, and I grew to love my twin brothers, Arthur and Alex. We shared countless memories, laughter, and family traditions. My stepmother made it a point to ensure that I never felt neglected. Even as she navigated the challenges of raising twins, she carved out time for our weekly movie nights, reinforcing that our bond remained strong. As I transitioned into adulthood and left for college on a full scholarship, I was excited to start a new chapter while staying close to my family. Dad had set aside a college fund for me, but since I didn't need it, he offered to keep it for me for later, suggesting I might invest it or save for a house down the line. I trusted his judgment, thinking it was a generous offer. Little did I know, his focus was shifting in ways I would soon discover. 1 month ago, everything changed. While driving to work, I spotted my dad with a woman I didn't recognize. Alarm bells rang in my mind. He was in my city, and he hadn't informed me. Suspicion and betrayal surged within me. I called him, attempting to sound casual as I asked about his whereabouts. But he lied, saying he was busy and would talk later. My gut instinct told me something was wrong, so I decided to follow him. My heart raced as I tailed him to a hotel. I booked a room, feeling a mix of dread and determination. When I saw him check in with the woman, I knocked on his door under the guise of housekeeping. The look of shock on his face when he opened the door was unforgettable. I barged in and confronted him, demanding an explanation. He tried to brush me off, insisting I had no right to intrude in his life, but the words spilled out of me. "If you don't tell me the truth, I'm calling Mom." I knew that threat carried weight, and it broke through his defenses. He confessed to having an affair with this woman for the past 10 years, his true love. I was stunned. How could he betray my mother, the woman who had given him everything? Dad tried to defend his actions by saying their relationship had turned into a mere coexistence after the twins were born. He painted a picture of an open relationship, but I knew better. Open relationships don't work that way. They don't involve maintaining a 10-year affair with someone outside the marriage. I refused to believe his excuses and made it clear that I would inform my stepmother about his betrayal. His desperate pleas for me not to make that call only highlighted his guilt. The fight escalated, and in that moment, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. I called him names, expressing my disappointment and disgust. He had once been a figure of authority in my life, but now he was just a man who had shattered the image of a family I thought was stable. As I stormed out of that hotel room, I realized that I had just uncovered the truth about my father, a man I had idolized. My stepmother deserved better than this, and I knew I had to tell her what I had discovered. The moment I left, I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had betrayed my father, but in my heart, I knew I was doing the right thing. My family may have been dysfunctional, but I had always sought to build connections that mattered. It was time to break the cycle of toxicity and allow the truth to emerge, no matter how painful it might be. I only hope that this will lead to healing, understanding, and ultimately, a brighter future for everyone involved. I told him he had done the same thing to Mom that his first wife, my biological mother, had done to him. He defended himself, saying they were totally different situations and that I would understand when I was older. I replied that I was already 30 and didn't need to wait to see what was really happening. He claimed his first wife was a serial cheater who cheated for fun, but he was actually in love. So what he did was justified, and what my biological mother did was not. I told him that if these excuses helped him sleep at night, he could believe them, but I wouldn't be fooled. I said I was going to talk to Mom whether he liked it or not, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. He physically stopped me from leaving the room and threatened to cut me out of his inheritance if I told Mom. I was shocked and then started laughing. I told him I never knew he could go so low to protect himself, and that I didn't want his dirty money anyway. I told him to keep his wealth, and that I would also tell Arthur and Alex what he was up to. They were 20 now and old enough to understand and have their own opinions. He begged me to reconsider. When that didn't work, he tried to bribe me by saying he would give me full ownership of his business, even if it meant hurting Arthur and Alex. I couldn't believe how low he was willing to go. I told him if he thought I would hurt my brother's future for his money, he didn't know me at all. I was grateful Mom raised me and not him, because with his morals, he could rival the devil. I stormed out of the room, crying. It felt like my world was falling apart, and I had to deal with so much. I knew he would try to manipulate Mom and tell her a twisted story to hide the truth. I quickly booked a ticket to their place, took a week off work, and left that very night. I knew this couldn't be done over the phone. I needed to be there because Mom would be heartbroken, and I didn't want her to be alone. When I arrived the next day, Mom was so happy to see me, thinking I was there for a surprise. I had to hold back my tears. She had devoted her life to this man, and he had betrayed her in the worst way. He had been living a double life for 10 years while she was caring for their home and family. It was awful, and I felt so angry. If Dad were there, I might have lost control. I asked Mom when Dad would be back. She told me he was on a week-long trip, but had called to say he was coming back urgently. She was excited because she thought I would finally meet him. I had no idea how to break the news to her, but as her daughter, I knew it was my responsibility to tell her, no matter what would happen. I knew Dad might kick me out of the inheritance and that Mom would be devastated, but I couldn't stay silent. That night, Dad came home, and he looked shocked to see me. He knew I was going to tell Mom the truth. I sat them down and told Mom I had something important to share. I told her everything, what I had seen, how I had called him, and how he had lied to me. I explained how he pretended they were in an open relationship and all the lies he had told. I didn't leave anything out. At first, Mom was in shock and didn't want to believe it. When Dad saw she was hesitant to accept the truth, he jumped in with a weak excuse, but she interrupted him. They started fighting fiercely. My mom has always been gentle, rarely getting angry, but that day was different. She was furious. They argued for what felt like an hour, shouting and throwing insults. I just listened, unsure of what they hoped to achieve because it seemed impossible to fix things. Mom had always made it clear that she wouldn't accept cheating. She said their marriage was over and she wanted a divorce, but wanted to keep things peaceful for us kids. Dad, on the other hand, was desperate and said he wouldn't let her leave him. He wanted to bring my brothers, Arthur and Alex, home to talk to her. He got their tickets that night, and they arrived 2 days later. Those 2 days were terrible. I stayed with Mom while Dad moved to the spare room. They weren't speaking, and I didn't talk to Dad either. When Dad picked the boys up from the airport, I don't know what he said, but they came back completely changed. Mom and I thought they would support her, but they sided with Dad, telling Mom to accept things and not break up the family. I wanted to slap them. Alex was the one speaking, but Arthur seemed to agree with him. Dad looked pleased with himself, and I suspected he promised them something, probably money. I confronted them, asking if Dad had put money over their heads. They wouldn't answer me. I told them I would help them get student loans if they needed help, but they just kept repeating what Dad had said. I didn't have the courage to look at Mom. I knew she was heartbroken and had raised them better than that. Dad couldn't control me financially, but he had power over Arthur and Alex because he could cut them off. Mom decided to leave Dad after he cheated, even though he apologized. She felt she couldn't stay with him. When she told everyone about the divorce, she was determined. I immediately supported her. letting her know she didn't have to worry because I was there for her. During this tough time, Dad told my brothers to go to their room and talked to Mom in a rude way. He made it sound like the blame for the family breaking apart would be all on her if she went through with the divorce. Mom stood her ground and said she couldn't stay married to someone who had cheated. After that, Dad got angry and stormed off. I went back to work but stayed in touch with Mom. I felt sad that I couldn't be there for her more. I had my own responsibilities, but I hoped my brothers would support Mom instead of being scared about Dad cutting them off financially. I wish they had the courage to stand up to Dad and be there for Mom, who needed them now more than ever. Update: Mom filed for divorce, trying to keep things as peaceful as possible. But things got worse when she found out that Dad had cut me out of the inheritance. He told her that if she filed for divorce, I would get nothing from the family money. He was trying to use this threat against her because he knew she cared about my future. But I'm an adult now and refuse to let him control me with money. Mom called me, crying and scared about leaving Dad because of what he said about my inheritance. It broke my heart to see her so worried. I told her not to worry about me and to go ahead with the divorce. I assured her I was fine on my own and didn't need his money. She thanked me, grateful for my support. The next interesting turn came when Mom talked to her lawyer, who was very smart. He held Dad accountable, and although Mom hadn't shared many details with me, Dad called me the next day, angry and blaming me for ruining his life. He insisted that I was supporting Mom, and that if I kept doing so, I wasn't his daughter. I found his anger confusing, so I reached out to Mom, and she sounded happy and relieved. She had moved out and was living with a friend. She shared some funny details about the situation, and I couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that karma was catching up with Dad. Years ago, Mom had sold her jewelry to help fund Dad's business, something we never knew about until she told her lawyer. She trusted him to succeed and wanted to help him, never thinking he would betray her. When Mom told her lawyer about this, he took action. Mom asked for half of Dad's business because of her past support, but Dad couldn't run the business as a partnership. I can't reveal too much, but the lawyer said Dad would have to buy Mom out or run the business with her, which wasn't a practical option. So Dad found himself in a difficult position. I think that's why he looked scared when I confronted him. He knew that if this went public, Mom would leave him, and since she had invested so much, he would have to give her half. Now he was trying to make things right, but Mom wasn't interested. She wasn't going to compromise, and it seemed like the judge was on her side. Update 2. The divorce is finalized, and Mom officially has half of Dad's assets. Dad is furious and hasn't stopped complaining about it to anyone who will listen. People are starting to get tired of his rants and distance themselves from him. The best part is that his mistress left him as soon as she found out he lost his money. Now, Dad has lost his family, his money, and his respect, all for a woman who walked away when his financial situation changed. Once the divorce was final, I texted Dad, telling him he was dead to me and that I wanted no contact with him again. I blocked him because I truly want nothing to do with him anymore. He can deal with the consequences of his actions. Now, for the most interesting part. Mom has decided to leave all her property and assets to me. She knows that Dad wouldn't give me anything, especially since he manipulated my brothers with money. Mom didn't want me to miss out on what was rightfully mine. When my brothers found out, they called me, demanding that I share my inheritance with them because we were family. I reminded them that Mom was family too, but they hadn't supported her when she needed it. They had nothing to say to that, but still insisted I split my share. I told them they were acting entitled. While I understood Dad had manipulated them, they still needed to be decent. Arthur then said something hurtful, claiming I wasn't Mom's real daughter and had no right to the money. Alex agreed, which felt like a real betrayal. I know they said this out of anger, but it still hurt. I replied that if they were truly Mom's family, why hadn't they supported her when she was struggling? If I wasn't their real family, they had no right to ask me for anything. I ended the call and blocked them. I know they're still young, but at 20 years old, they should understand better. You need to have sensitivity to these issues. I'm going to forgive them eventually, but right now, I just need space. They've hurt me a lot, and I hope to get over it in time. I want to support my mom now, who has been strong throughout this ordeal. It's my turn to give her love and care, just like she has always done for me.